2, 3, 4. Let me tell you about PuckPedia, stats, contracts, and caps. It's all there for you. One-stop shop for your hockey information. It's a hockey sensation. So log on, log on, log on. If you give a puck, go to PuckPedia.com.
Welcome to episode 15 of the PuckPedia Hockey Show. Today we welcome on Chase Priskie, LinkedIn legend. We talk about Chase. He's currently in the KHL playing for Siberia, but we talk about his hockey journey, starting in the NCAA with Quinnipiac, then getting drafted by the Washington Capitals, going through the AHL journey, bouncing around to a few teams, getting traded a couple times. We also talk about him not signing a deal, and becoming a free agent and then signing with Carolina. So a lot of good, interesting stuff there. Then we transition a little bit, his playing career over in Russia now in Siberia of the KHL and what that's like and how it's been impacting him. He also tells us how his agents have kept him, through the entire process. He's represented by Louis Gross. So a lot of good stuff in that aspect. And then we wrap up the episode just talking about his little LinkedIn legend status. Bleacher Report really loves to post on that. So we talked through that with him and how that's kind of opened some doors for him once he's done playing his career. So without further ado, let's drop the puck. We now welcome on a very special guest. It's Chase Priskie. If you go on LinkedIn, you see this guy all the time posting his new career updates. He's currently playing in the KHL for Siberia. Chase, how's it going?
It's going well. How about you?
I'm good. We were talking offline a little bit. You guys are currently in the KHL, one of the lower ranked teams in the standings, but you're playing pretty well. You're getting the most average time on ice per game of all players in the KHL, but right now you're out of action with a little broken hand.
Yeah. Blocked a shot last game. Out for 3 weeks, so it's not really, my player comp. It's probably why I don't do that, but so got some time to reflect and just watch, and hopefully our team can kind of turn it around in the next couple weeks before I get back.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll talk about your KHL journey a little towards the end of this interview, but wanted to start things just kind of talking about your hockey background, your journey, playing college at Quinnipiac, top 10 finalist for Hobie Baker your senior year. You guys were a pretty good team that year, lost in the Elite Eight to the eventual national champions, Minnesota Duluth. So kind of talk about like how you kind of got into hockey and then kind of progressing through your college career and eventually getting drafted in the NHL.
Yeah, so I'm from Pembroke Pines, Florida, which is about 10 minutes south of Sunrise, and my parents were season ticket holders for the Florida Panthers, starting in 93 when they were in Miami, and then through 01, 02 when they were in Sunrise, and I was born in 96, the year up the rat when they played Colorado in the finals, and went to my first NHL game at 30 days old. And
you were throwing rats on the ice at 30 years old?
No, but I have a picture in my room, 30 days year old, like in the baby carrier at the game. And in my room, like the top above like the bookcases are a ton of rats, game used sticks, a John Van Beesbrook signed jersey. Like the amount of Florida Panther memorabilia I have in my room is wild. But I always had those. And then, getting to my first NHL game, I actually picked one up off the ice. So I kept that as a fun memento to keep. But yeah, I was around ice hockey pretty much my whole, adolescent life, and then started playing roller hockey at 4 years old and started playing, got into ice hockey at 5, and it just kind of took off, and just, I was addicted to playing.
Yeah, and then like we mentioned, like you kind of, how was the recruitment kind of going into college and like moving up, like, when you're younger? And a lot of Americans too have a decision to make, right? If they want to go the college route or the CHL route or maybe like USHL also, like what kind of went into that decision-making process when you were kind of becoming someone who's eligible for any of those leagues?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say particularly lucky, but, coming from Florida, not your obvious hockey market. So I played with the same group of kids from the age of 6 to 15 when I left Florida to go to South Kent School in Connecticut. And then, it was a pretty easy decision for me. My first year up at South Kent, it was the first year of the Selects Hockey Academy. So we were playing a AAA schedule, which kind of modeled the Shattuck, live at a prep school, play a midget schedule. And I remember as a team, we were touring Quinnipiac, and I kind of got peeled off to the side and met with Rand Pecknold and he'd offered me a scholarship, and I called my mom after and told her, and she said, "You're going to go back in the office and tell them you're coming." And I didn't really even open up my recruitment. I just walked back in, said I spoke to my mom. I'll be there. So that's kind of how that worked out. And then I remember talking to Devin Rask, who is our coach, who's now at Mount St. Charles, and he kind of asked me like, "What you guys talk about in there?" And I told him like, "Oh, like they offered me a scholarship." And he's like, "Oh, like that's a pretty big deal." And in my mind, I just never really thought of myself as a Division I hockey player coming from Florida. You just kind of played because you were having fun. So I think that was like the first time in my life where I really realized like, oh, like, maybe I can be good. Like I think that was like the turning point in my career where I was kind of understood like, okay, like, this thing doesn't sort of happen for everyone. So, maybe there is some, potential that I can play at a higher level. And then that same year didn't get drafted into the USHL Futures Draft. I don't know if they still call it that, but or like Phase 1. And so for me, I never really thought about going to the USHL. Obviously, I wasn't drafted. So I just stayed in high school. And then I think after my junior year, I was drafted in the Phase 2 draft and like I don't know, it was like past the 20th round, 23rd, 25th. I don't even remember, but it was so late where like I didn't even put any stock into it. I was like, okay, well, I'm just filling out a roster at this point. Like they don't really foresee me playing on the team. So finished playing in high school, and I'd spoken to Rand Pecknold, kind of just at that time I wasn't going to go to Quinnipiac, and I had to go play junior hockey, deciding between the USHL and the BCHL, and then I ultimately ended up going to the BCHL. Just Quinnipiac heavily recruited out of the BCHL up until that time. All the other guys in my recruiting class were playing in the BCHL. So for me, it was an easy decision to just go play there, kind of get acclimated to the style of play that they wanted, and get to know those guys around the league. And then the following year, enrolled at Quinnipiac.
Yeah, and like you said, Florida isn't necessarily a hockey hotbed, so it's interesting when you have players, and look at like Austin Matthews, right, coming from Arizona. Like there are opportunities in those lesser markets where players can, make an impact, be successful, get highly recruited, get scholarships, and then eventually kind of make it to the NHL.
Yeah, 100%. And like the group that I mentioned from Florida, I think we had 6 of us play Division I, which at that time, like, Shane Gostisbehere is 3 years older than us, and he kind of was like the trailblazer for like, went to South Kent School, then played at Union, then was drafted to Philly, and was breaking into the NHL at that time. And then, for my age group, we had 5 or 6 of us all played Division I, which was like pretty impressive, just because like the coaches we had growing up weren't former NHLers. It was just like one of the kids' dad was our coach. He played high school hockey in Detroit, and we all thought that was like unbelievable. So, but the state of hockey in Florida is grown exponentially since I was there, and a whole bunch of former NHLers have now kind of settled in that area, and the Florida Junior Panthers do such a great job, and the Golden Wolves of like just developing those players in general. And it's really fun to see now the NHL kind of littered with players from untraditional hockey markets.
Yeah, it's good to see. And like you mentioned, I think it's also interesting too. So then you end up, going to Quinnipiac, playing college hockey there, and then you end up getting drafted. I believe it's in the 5th round. So maybe talk through a little bit of that side of things of like while you're playing in college hockey, getting drafted, the decision to, continue out through your senior year, what that communication was like with the organization that drafted you, and kind of, I know like later in the draft, you don't necessarily have a lot of control of like negotiation in your ELC, your entry level contract, but maybe talk through that process, and maybe like also like how you decided to like, what agent you went through, and like that whole navigating that world.
Yeah, it was I kind of want to make the similarity to the USHL. Like I didn't get drafted at 18, didn't get drafted at 19. After playing my freshman year, 19, I had just turned 20, and then get drafted by Washington in the 5th round. So that was after my freshman year, and
Considered
at
like
that
an overager at that point too,
yeah,
right?
technically a double overager. Uh, so it was just one of those things where at that point I didn't even think I was going to get drafted. It was more of just like at this point, I'm just playing. Like, my mom's a high school math teacher in Florida, so like the education piece is really big in my family. So like she was always telling me, like, if you're going to college, like, you're getting a degree, you're staying 4 years. So for me, I always kind of knew like that was the path I was going to take.
Were
But
you even
to go
watching the
back,
draft when Washington drafted you?
we actually had the draft on, and then we turned it off, and we were going out to eat, and then ended up getting a phone call from Washington saying that they had drafted me. But yeah, just I guess I'll touch on the Washington piece first before I start on the agent piece. But yeah, through 3.5 years with Washington, we still have great communication. Like, we would fill out, weekly, prospect sheet that we would send to them, logging our sleep schedules, practice, game schedule, workout schedule, rating how we thought we played, what we could improve on. So I think that was a good piece in my head in terms of being able to self-analyze my game and then kind of, be able to dictate that to them, and then obviously have the conversation with their player development guys. And we had a great relationship. I went to their development camp for 3 years, and then coming to free agency after my senior year, just looking at the depth charts with them, and they had maxed out their contracts the spring of my senior year, so there was no ability for me to go and play games with them at the end, and ultimately that's what I was looking for. So then I had to wait a whole year, before my contract can start. So then at that point it was, okay, well, I'm going to finish out and get my MBA Quinnipiac my senior year instead of going to play in the American League on a PTO. So that was the route that I went with. And, then free agency came August 15th. I decided not to sign with Washington. I elected to go to free agency, and I signed with Carolina. And yeah, it was nothing. It was more of nothing that, Washington did. It was just like, we talk about, I talked with my agent, Louis Gross and Mark Toof, and there are only so many times in your career where you get the opportunity to choose where you want to go. And at that point where I knew that I didn't have the ability to go play games with Washington at the end of the year, and I had to wait until the next season to start my contract, where it was, okay, if I already know I'm not going to go play pro hockey, I'm going to stay at Quinnipiac, finish my MBA, is there any rush to sign with Washington, or would I be better off waiting to see where I can sign, and then, the availability of right-handed defensemen that they need? So my agent, Louis Gross and Mark Toof, going into free agency August 15th, they compiled lists of every NHL team and their right-handed defensemen in the NHL, their right-handed defensemen in the American League, their draft picks they have, and they went through, I think it was 31 teams at the time, and they were able to kind of boil that down to maybe 16 teams that needed right-handed defensemen, young right-handed offensive defensemen. So then, then we got to talking, okay, well, if these are the 16 teams, where would I want to go play? Who has a track record of developing defensemen? Do I want to go to a team that's at the, the bottom of the rankings, and you might have a better chance of, establishing yourself early? But the other side of that is, if you don't have the statistics to kind of put up with that, are you just flushed out by the next guy that comes? Or do you hope to go to a better team where you get put into a lineup with, players that can support you, and then, kind of the high tide rises all ships kind of mentality? Yeah, I just started looking at teams that were on that list, and, that wasn't even a list of teams that I even knew were going to have an offer for me. It was just a kind of a list of teams that would be good options. And then obviously August 15th comes, and then, Louis and Mark started talking to teams, and, within 24 or 48 hours, I kind of had an idea of what teams were serious offers and what teams didn't have interest. And I ended up deciding on Carolina. And that was, a lot of things came into account, but for me, it was, they only had one young defenseman in their system, Jake Bean, who is a left-handed defenseman. They were thin on the right side. They had no one signed. So in the minors that year, we had Freddie Clayson lefty, Jake Bean lefty, Gustav Forsling lefty, myself, and then Kyle Wood, who they eventually traded, who's a righty. So I was the only one that was a righty. So in my head, when I'm picking that team, okay, Carolina's always one of the top contenders, and right-handed defenseman goes down. They only have really one to choose from. So I wanted to put myself in the best situation possible to get called up, and I thought I did.
Yeah, and like to your point too, I think it's super interesting that how detailed that whole thought process was. And I'm always curious, like, not with obviously the high end players, but kind of those guys that are like between the AHL and the NHL, like how much thought goes into like the current team's construct. And then also to your point too, where you decided to become a free agent when your entry level kind of, or the rights to them have signed you kind of expired at August 15th date. And like, there's not too many players that are notable that make it that far unsigned. Like, Jimmy Vesey is kind of one that sticks out in my mind a little bit, where you get drafted, but then you don't necessarily sign with that team. And I think, going through all that, you doing development camps there. And I think it's interesting too, the Capitals were like pretty keen on like, weekly plans, like trying to get your like take on what you're doing and having that back and forth, I think is all good. And you mentioned like Gustav Forsling being in the minors too. This guy's now like a star defenseman for the Florida Panthers, signed a long-term deal.
He's unbelievable.
Passed through waivers a couple times. Like it's funny how like development is not a linear curve, but it could go any sort of which direction. But yeah, and then like you mentioned too, like you played in Charlotte with the AHL over there, and then you kind of had, I think you got traded a couple times too. You bounced around with a few different AHL teams. So like, what was all that like doing to your mental in terms of like just being, trusting the process, but also like knowing that you want to make it to the NHL, and you kind of are bouncing around between all these different AHL teams at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I never really considered myself an AHL journeyman until now. Thank you.
That's what I'm here for.
No, it's all good. So I was traded twice. The first one I didn't know about. The second one I knew was coming. The first one I was traded in the big, I don't know if you'd call it blockbuster, but in that Vincent Trocheck trade with Eetu Luostarinen, we were kind of the two prospects that went from Carolina to Florida.
Paula too, right?
Yep, Paula. And Walmart.
Okay.
He's kind of the four of us. And I remember, like, to bring things full circle, I talked to the GM in Florida before I made my decision to sign in Carolina. And when I got traded to Florida, I remember him calling and saying, "I told you we'd have you." So, and it made me feel good that, they weren't upset with my decision to go in a different direction, and I was there. So I was moved to Springfield at the deadline, and I think I played 5 games in Springfield. And I was actually called up to make my debut in Boston, and I had a car service to take me from Springfield to the Garden at 1:00, and noon rolls around, get a call, the league shut down because of COVID.
Oh,
so that was like my terrible timing sort of thing, And then I got the call from Dale Talon. Like a month after that, I'd driven down to Florida because the AHL season was paused, and got a call from Dale Talon that you're going to be part of the taxi, or the extent. They didn't call it taxi squads at that time; they were the extended rosters.
Yeah.
That were going to. So, got to go to the bubble with Florida in Toronto. We were there for a short stint, and then after the bubble, Dale Talon got fired, and Bill Zito came in. So you could see the regime start to change in Florida. You could see the culture start to shift, right? He made the huge trade with Huberdeau and Uyghur. And that was the season after, right after like the season I had spent, that was kind of my full cup of coffee year in the NHL. I think I spent close to 30 games in the NHL.
You got in for 4.
Yep, got to play in 4, but predominantly a healthy scratch.
With your team that you grew up cheering for too, which is kind of cool, full circle moment.
Yeah, it was. I will say, like as hard as it is to kind of swallow the pill that you're never going to be, I don't want to say never good enough to play in the NHL, but that you're never going to be a full-time player. The fact that I got to live out my dream with the team that I grew up cheering for, the team that I got to go spend a lot of nights with my parents there, I got to make the debut at home in front of fans and family, you know, people that I went to middle school with, high school with. Was one of the coolest things that you could ever, you know, accomplish in your life. And for me, you know, it's one of the biggest accomplishments I've had in my life to date. So even though it was short, to be able to live out my dream in Florida was, you know, one of the coolest things ever. But yeah, so I was there with the Bill Zito, you know, start to change the culture, and you could see it really start to change. So it's not surprising that they were able to win, you know, back to back. Obviously, the Matthew Tkachuk trade, you know, plays up a huge role in that. But you know, they started to change over the whole roster immediately, and you could just tell, like, he was, you know, he was making hockey trades. It was no longer, I don't want to say an emotional piece, but he was there to win, and he created a winning culture. So after that year, I became a free agent, ended up signing in Buffalo, was assigned to Rochester. This trade I knew was happening. I had asked for a trade. For whatever reason, things just didn't work out in Rochester. I had a great preseason in Buffalo.
Did you think that you had a chance to make that roster out of the preseason?
Yeah. So when I sat down with Lewis and Mark, you know, again, like I will say this, they do such an unbelievable job preparing their players for free agency, preparing them for, you know, for what they can expect. So going into free agency 3 or 4 times in my career, there wasn't one time until this season that I was surprised, which is great. So going into that season, they again, you know, they kind of had an idea of what teams were, I don't want to say interested, but, you know, teams that had no right D depth in the minors, right? You got to go out and you got to fill those spots with someone.
You play a position, and you got to look at how teams are structured and where there are openings.
Exactly. So, you know, if we had a list of 10 teams that needed right-handed defensemen, especially to be call-up options, by the time free agency rolled around, you know, the day of free agency, we had gotten calls from a portion of those teams. So I knew, you know, at least what to expect, and kind of had my rankings of, okay, if these were 10 teams that we thought would be calling, and then maybe you add, you know, a handful of teams elsewhere that called, okay, I already had my rankings of teams, and then maybe I can input 2 or 3 other teams and then have my deciding factors, whatever those might be. But going into Buffalo, I had looked at their roster. They had nothing on the right side. And another team where, you know, it was Casey Fitzgerald and myself, and it would be the two of us kind of battling for a position to be that 5, 6, 7, 8 spot. You know, with 7, 8 kind of being in Rochester or being up there full time. Free agency, you know, Buffalo ended up being on that list that, you know, had a contract offered, and thought that would be the best place for me to go. You know, went there, had a great training camp, ended up in Rochester. For whatever reason, it was kind of the first time in my pro career where I just didn't mesh well with the systems they had in place, and the coaching, and you know, it was no one's fault. It was just, you know, sometimes things just don't work well. You see it with NHL, with AHL players all the time. You get to a new system, and you know, I had been a 30, 35 point guy in the American League every year, and I really struggled to find myself in their system.
You even look at Mikko Rantanen last year, right? Like in the Carolina Hurricane system, like he just didn't mesh well. And this is an elite level talent and winger in the NHL. And if he can't mesh well with certain systems, then obviously other players are in the same boat.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people forget that aspect. Like, every system, whether they play the same system or not, there are tweaks to everything, which makes things different. And just because you're getting a certain type of player, you know, they do have to adapt to that system. Most players do it in a quick manner, but sometimes it takes longer, and some players aren't able to at all. But you know, that was the case for me, and I was ended up traded to Anaheim, had a really good stint in San Diego, and then that summer Washington actually called, and ended up going back to Washington, ended up in Hershey, won a Calder Cup. They had after the Calder Cup, they had called about wanting to bring me back, and for me, it was a no-brainer. Like, Washington's such a great organization, top to bottom. Like, the way they treat the NHL, the AHL, The ECHL is like, you talk about taking a page out of someone's book. Like that's an organization that you look at them and you're like, okay, they're doing things the right way at all three levels. So I give them a lot of credit for that. And then this summer came, and unfortunately, I ended up in that vet exempt status. I think I was 3 games before being a veteran, and just with the vet rule in the American League, you can only dress 6 a night, and the job dwindles from being 25 per team to 6 per team. And just with my resume, 4 NHL games, 1 Calder Cup, but those veterans are usually your guys with 100, 200 NHL games. You're kind of plug and play players that especially on the defensive position, you're looking at guys that can kill penalties, that can come and fight. Like you want your steady eddies that can play that 10 to 12 minutes and give you the best 10 to 12 minutes they have.
You can't fight?
And not right now, but maybe I can take some boxing lessons here in Novosibirsk, and maybe I can come back to the American League and talk to Dylan McElrath and see if I can get on his good side and start fighting. But
there you go. That guy's a scrapper. But yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, right? Let's talk about the KHL side of things, right? So then you kind of go through that and you realize that, like, with given your status and the vet rule and AHL not being able to dress a ton of vets, that maybe your hockey journey has to take kind of a different route. So when you're going through that process, like, kind of what led you to the team that you're currently with now, like, or even like the KHL in general? Like, there's obviously the Swedish league, there's other leagues over in Europe too. So how'd you kind of end up in this position?
it was a whirlwind. I mean, I was Mark and Lewis were both pretty shocked that I didn't even have, an American League deal on the table. Because I thought, you played whatever 300 plus games, over average half a point a game. Like, someone out there is going to need some offense from the back. And it was just kind of crickets. I think the free agent market this year, a lot of those players had re-signed with their teams. And I'm talking like, the big dogs in the NHL, like those guys had re-signed with their teams. So the free agent market for NHL players was thinner than usual. And then, that kind of just pushes everyone down a ring where it's like, okay, well, maybe we can wait to sign our depth guys. We don't need to sign right away. And unfortunately, I was one of those guys that was just kind of put on the back burner. And I think, maybe if I would have waited, an opportunity would arose. But at the same time, this is a job and I have to take care of my family. So I started looking at other opportunities and sat down with my wife and we started talking about, okay, well, where do we want to end up? Obviously Sweden, Russia, and Switzerland were like the top 3 for us, and started looking at options in Sweden. Switzerland was kind of out of the question. It was just too late in the game for someone with my resume. And I ended up getting contacted by a Russian agent who had an offer in Novosibirsk, and we kind of went back. And I'll say, like, negotiations were pretty quick. Like within 48 or 72 hours, I had a contract signed. Like they were moving fast, and spoke to a couple guys that had played here for some time, and they both, all 3 of them said, like, great place to play, 3rd biggest city in Russia. Like, you're not in like a town, like you're in a big city. And they just built a new arena, first class amenities, and it's a packed house every night, which they were spot on with everything. Like the city's awesome, the arena's beautiful, and the people in Novosibirsk are some of the most passionate hockey fans I've been around. Like, it is a packed building, whether it's a 3:00 game, a 7:00 game, Tuesday night, Saturday night. That rink is just jam packed. But it's been a good adjustment. So it's been quite the adjustment, but it's been really good.
What's been the biggest adjustment relative to like the NHL and AHL? I think I was reading an article too, like your family's not necessarily over there yet. Like the next time you'll see them is in a couple months, I think in January, you and your wife, and then I think you just got a dog as well. So I imagine that is part of it, but also like on the hockey side of things too, like just total overhaul, I feel like, of lifestyle.
Yeah, it's just completely different. I think the biggest thing, my wife and I have done distance before. So, I mean, we haven't done distance around the world, but we know what it's like to go, some time not seeing each other. But the hockey is just different. I feel like the NHL and the American League is a lot of straight lines, getting up and down the ice. It's forechecking hockey. And here it's just kind of the exact opposite. Like, you're not really dumping pucks. You bring the puck back, you're regrouping with 5 guys. You're trying to mismatch speed. You're trying to create like a speed differential on the attack. And there are some teams that we play that won't even forecheck if they can't, sustain 5 guys on the forecheck. They'll just pull out to the neutral zone and, clog it up and play some sort of trap.
It's
And
like the neutral zone trap of the Devils of the early 2000s.
when they just sat there at the top of the circles and no one moved. That's kind of how the game is played here. Some nights it's interesting. Like, now that there are some American, or I shouldn't say American, but North American coaches over here, Guy Boucher, Bob Hartley,
Gerard
Ben
Gallant,
Walker,
right? Just got
Gerard Gallant.
Yeah.
So, I think there are 4 North American coaches, and they play more of a north-south style, which is kind of the outlier here. So it works a lot of the time. Like, those are some good teams. But a lot of teams here still play like a trap style of hockey. So it's a lot of like neutral zone regroups, taking guys one-on-one, just much different than, how the NHL or the AHL is played, where it's kind of beating guys, putting pucks to space, being able to find holes. Like, here, you're holding onto the puck, you're trying to beat them one-on-one, just kind of take it to the net.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's like just an interesting just development. And I guess for you now, like, this is obviously your first season in the KHL. Where do you kind of view yourself maybe in the next, year or year and a half to 2 years? Is there like a plan to kind of come back to North America, or are you kind of enjoying yourself, living in the moment and kind of seeing how the KHL unfolds? I know you had mentioned you're enjoying playing for your team, and I think it's let's see like what kind of plays out through the rest of the year.
Yeah, it's so hard to tell with the future what might happen. I would love to come back to North America and play. Obviously, then I'd be full-fledged vet status with the games I've played here. But, I've really enjoyed life over here. I've really enjoyed everything, that has been about the KHL. So I could definitely see myself playing here for an extended period of time. And so we'll kind of see what happens. I wouldn't be opposed to staying here for 2, 3, 4 more years, but it's just so hard to tell what the future might hold.
Exactly. Well, Chase, this has been awesome. One last question before we kind of let you go. It's the cool bet question. If you go to puckpedia.com/coolbet, you can get in on the action today. Stay cool, bet responsibly, puckpedia.com/coolbet. So I think a lot of your fame in the hockey world comes from your LinkedIn posts. I think it's pretty funny how every time you kind of get a new job, people seem to find out about it first on LinkedIn. So I guess like my question to you would be kind of what started that whole doing updates using LinkedIn. I think I saw it was kind of a decision you made in college when one of your professors suggested you get a LinkedIn page. But you also mentioned how that's helped kind of people reached out to you and say, hit me up when your hockey career is over. I have, opportunities available to you. So talk to us a little bit about using LinkedIn as a tool to both, for the fun of it, but also to kind of maybe help with your future when you're done playing down the road.
Yeah, it's it was part of the curriculum. School of Business 101 class had to create a LinkedIn profile, and just kind of kept it up ever since. Just kept updating it, not really thinking anything of it, and then obviously started breaking my free agent signings on there, which the guys at Bleacher Report love. So thanks to them for always posting it. Appreciate you guys. But yeah, just kind of always use LinkedIn. And I think people sometimes forget that athletes are just normal people that play sports for a living. And I think having the accessibility of being able to message people, on LinkedIn has just made it very easy to be a personable character on there. So for me, just using it, and I've had people, whether it's job offers, product promotions, being able to send stuff, like, it's been great just, connecting with people in all different, walks of life. And, I'll continue using it. And I think it's something everyone should take advantage of. Like, everyone has Instagram, everyone has Twitter. Like, it's just one other tool to enhance your public image. But it's kind of crazy to talk about it like that. But Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, it's really just personal branding at the end of the day, right? And it seemed to pick up a lot of steam in hockey Twitter, especially. So it is cool. It is funny to see. But Chase, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for the time. Good luck with your recovery from your broken finger. Hopefully, when you come back, your team has kind of picked it up a little bit, and you're grinding towards the end of the season with maybe a playoff race in mind. So thanks again, Chase. We appreciate the time.
No, thank you. Thank you.
PuckPedia.